welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned when you're researching these upcoming MMA events. We've just surpassed 4,300 fighter profiles for you to browse through and study with direct links to past fights for all these competitors, and we cover 17 different promotions from all over the world. It is best used, obviously, during the Contender series, as a lot of these guys jumping over for the regional scene that you may not have heard of. We have you covered in terms of studying up on them and learning who they are, as you'll have direct access to a lot of the fights that they've had in the past. This is used by handicappers, fighters, commentators, coaches, analysts, all the above. We have over 90 subscribed members on there as well, and there is a 7-day free trial for you to try it out for free, so you can see what all the hoopla is about. So if you do your own studying and you want to learn all these fighters, and not to mention just the UFC, but we have Bellator, PFL, ACA, KSW, OKTAGON, UAE Warriors, and the list goes on. 17 different promotions, all on the MMA Fight Archive. Check the link in the description below. Once again, there's a 7-day free trial. Take full advantage of that. All right. This weekend, we're going to be talking about UFC Paris, headlined by a big-time lightweight matchup between Benoit Saint-Denis and Renato Moicano. And the co-main event is a high-stakes middleweight matchup between Nasruddin Imavov and Brendan Allen. And a plethora of other great and fun and entertaining fights. We got 14 total fights on this Paris card. I believe it kicks off at noon Eastern time, so a little bit of an earlier start time that we're used to, obviously, considering that this is taking place in Paris. And also, just to throw out there, there's also PFL Europe going down at the same time this weekend. So I'll be breaking that down strictly in written form on the MMALOTN Patreon page, which you can find in the description below, a link for that. I won't have enough time this week to be able to put out a video for that event, but again, I will break it down in written form, and I'll have track plays just as I will have for the Paris card. I'll also have for that PFL Europe card as well. So make sure you guys check that out. All right, let's do a quick recap for the last UFC event, which was UFC 306 for the Lock of the Night and Dog of the Night, where we did very well there. For the Lock of the Night, we had Ronaldo Rodriguez cashing out -125. Very close fight early, but I thought Rodriguez really started to pull away in the second and third rounds. I was obviously shitting my pants when Rodriguez got dropped badly and pretty much finished in that first round, but luckily the referee did not stop the fight. Rodriguez was able to continue and then eventually rally back and win that fight. So very happy to cash that. That now brings our Lock of the Night record to 71-33 on the year for a 68% hit rate. We're on the right track, but again, still far from the goal that I'd like to be at. Firmly in the profit, which is the most important part. But again, in terms of setting goals, you want to achieve them, and we're still a little bit behind in terms of that. For the Dog of the Night, we are on the right track there. Hitting last time around, we hit on Valentina Shevchenko at +120. Goes out there and does what she should have done through the first two matchups with Grasso, but got a little bit too cute in some of those spots. But we saw her dominate Alexa Grasso through 25 minutes and retain, or at least win back, her UFC Flyweight Championship. That now brings our record to 38-69 for the Dog of the Night in 2024 for a 35% hit rate. I believe we're about 4 units closer to hitting the break-even part of the year, because obviously we started off the year not too great on the Dog of the Night side of things. But I'm glad that we're getting back in the right track and headed in the right direction there. All right. Reminder, like I said, PFL Europe breakdowns only on the MMALOTN Patreon page. And then shout out to GodzillaWins.com, which provides your boy a platform to drop written content on a weekly basis for UFC cards. On Thursday, we dropped the main event breakdowns, and on Fridays, we dropped the top 3 moneyline spots. So you guys can check that out. GodzillaWins.com. Shout out to those guys, and check them out for other sports as well. Not just the MMA game, which I mainly run over there, but they cover all other sports that you can bet on. So make sure you guys check them out, because we got a lot of sharp guys on there that you can trust to tail. All right. 14 fights to break down, like I said, on this card. A ton of fights. So Yeah, let's get into it. I don't want to take too long on every single matchup. It's one thing to try to get back into the groove in terms of being in front of the camera and breaking down these fights for you guys, especially when you got a 14-fight card ahead of you. So I'll see if I can shake off the rust here and get through these as efficiently as possible. All right, first fight of the night, lightweight division, where we got Balaji Oki coming in at -190, going up against Chris Duncan, who comes in at +165. Starting off on Oki, he had a successful UFC debut back in February, and although it said it was a split decision victory over Timothy Kwamba, I thought that one judge was off his rocker to give Kwamba that fight. I thought Oki won the first round and third round relatively convincingly, and I think that was more than enough for him to get his hand raised. He showed great patience with his striking, and he's no longer just looking to take people's heads off. He's very good, disciplined, and technical in terms of walking his opponents down and landing his big strikes to try to damage them and either find a knockout or just outpoint them and end up winning on the scorecards. I was impressed with his ability to battle back from the grappling success that Kwamba had in the second round, and he was able to pick up the confidence in the third round and win that fight. He's 9-1, only lost his first ever professional fight, and he's looking good and better every time we see him. His opponent, Chris Duncan, is going to be kicking himself even more after that loss that he suffered at the hands of Manuel Torres in a fight where he hurt him very badly at the beginning of the fight, and then he went to his grappling, which is something that we've been seeing a lot from him over his last couple of fights, and it ended up coming back to bite him in the ass, as Torres did a great job in terms of reversing the position, even while hurt, getting the back of Duncan, and eventually finding that submission to get the tap. Duncan has found success with grappling against guys like Omar Morales and Yanal Ashmus, but he was originally a striker that loved to walk his opponents down and utilize his combination striking approach to get finishes. But we've obviously seen his game evolve since he joined American Top Team over the last couple of years, and we are seeing him round out his game a little bit more, but I think a little bit of sharpening that fight IQ would be very helpful for him. In this matchup against Oki, it reminds me of past spots where I've been so trigger happy on taking guys that are still trying to improve themselves in the UFC, especially when their first or second fight with the promotion, and they've had such a good run on the regional scene, but then they end up coming up short against guys that have a little bit more UFC experience. So me, maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, would jump all over Oki, maybe even make him a lock of the night play, but I'm going to temper my expectations here, and I'm going to still take him to win this matchup, as I think his power and explosivity will keep Duncan at bay, and I think we saw good enough takedown, or at least good enough grappling defense from Oki recently to believe that he should be able to stuff and stop most of Duncan's grappling advances here. I'm going to go with Oki. I think he eventually finds that knockout against Duncan here, but at -190, it's a little bit too out of my betting zone to be confident in terms of taking that chalk, but I do think Oki wins this matchup, and I think he gets the knockout. Next up, a rematch between Nora Cornolle, who comes in at +180, going up against Jacqueline Cavalcanti, who comes in at -210 in this women's bantamweight matchup. Starting off on Cornolle, she pulled off an upset last time around against Melissa Mullins in a fight where I felt very confident and comfortable backing Mullins at chalk. Unfortunately, Mullins was unable to have extended grappling success as I expected her to have, as we saw Cornolle utilize reversals, good takedown defense, and then her aggressiveness in the striking game, which allowed her to open up that finish and get the win over Mullins. The fight prior to that, very close fight against Jocelyn Edwards in her UFC debut, but she managed to edge it out on the scorecards and get her hand raised, possibly some hometown cooking there as well. She comes from a Muay Thai background, and you often see that with how aggressive she is, utilizing all 8 limbs, good knees, good elbows, good aggressiveness and forward pressure. But she is also 34 years old, which is something that needs to be considered. Her opponent, Jacqueline Cavalcanti, makes a quick turn here as she picked up a win over Josiane Nunes last month, and she jumps in on short notice here to try to go 2-0 over a woman she defeated in her second professional fight. Cavalcanti is normally a disciplined and technical striker that likes to utilize her range and her jab from distance, as well as that deep kick up the middle. She likes to set her own pace and tries to really damage opponents from distance and do good enough work. She's not a huge knockout threat at this level. She's a little bit more concerned with just remaining disciplined and keeping her feet under her. And she has decent enough grappling when she needs to rely on it, although I don't think it's that high level that she can get away with it as like a dog styling wrestler type style. That's not going to work out for her. I think more so for her, it's the striking that gets her success. Now, when these two met, These first two originally met back in mid-2021. It was the first professional fight for Cornolle, while it was the second for Cavalcanti. And I think we saw it play out a little bit closer than people originally thought. Cavalcanti clearly won the fight, but I think it more so had to do with the greenness of Cornolle in the MMA cage and her uncomfortability of like mixing the martial arts. Cavalcanti landed some good punches, some good spots. I think she dropped Cornolle a few times as well, but I really think we saw not as confident of a version of Cornolle that night as we'll likely see this weekend. I think we've seen Cornolle very much improve her confidence over the 8 fights that she's had since that matchup. And I think it could make this fight a lot closer than the odds actually indicate. Mixed in the hometown cooking that could possibly benefit Cornolle in this spot, and the aggressiveness and forward nature of her style that could cause Cavalcanti some issues in terms of establishing her range and staying, solid at distance. I think we'll see Cornolle crowd her space, take away that distance management for Cavalcanti, and really keep her foot on the gas here. I don't think we'll see her as flimsy with her striking defense as we saw in their first fight 3 years ago, and I think that could benefit her here in terms of staying in Cornolle's space and staying in Cavalcanti's face and putting pressure, activity, and volume on her. So Cornolle is not a fighter that I've been high on over her first 2 UFC fights. I've kind of given her a lot of flack, honestly, but I think that this is a matchup considering the circumstances, the short notice, the travel for Cavalcanti, the weight cut once again, and again, taking it on this short of notice, not the best. I know her confidence is high, but it's not the best decision considering going into the backyard of Cornolle and trying to get this win as well, especially considering the confidence that Cornolle has now too. So I'm going to go Cornolle by decision. This could be, it's more so me gambling on this being a closer fight than the odds indicate. And I think there just might be a little bit too much recency bias on the Cavalcanti side, considering her recent performances against Farron and Nunes. But I think Cornolle will bring the fight a little bit more than those 2 past opponents have. So give me Cornolle and Cornolle by decision. But again, plus 180, not a bad spot. All right, next up, Daniel Barez coming in at plus 105 in this flyweight matchup, going up against Victor Altamirano, who comes in at minus 125. Starting off on the Barez side, he fell short in his UFC debut against Jafel Filho last July 2023, that is. And that was a fight where he hurt Filho multiple times to the body in the first minute of that fight, but was unable to close the show, allowing Filho to get his wits back about him, put the pressure on Barez, and eventually find that submission after getting that takedown. Barez has been out of action due to injuries and personal matters over the last year or so. And at 35 years old, you have to wonder how much more time he has competing at his best, considering the lower weight classes normally start to fall off in terms of their effectiveness around that 34, 35-year range. He's a good striker, nasty combinations, good elbows, good leg kicks as well. His takedown defense, although it shows 91% on UFC stats, I still have some question marks in terms of the amount of data and the sample size that we have there to actually track that for Barez. We saw how easily Filho was able to get to him, but I also think that had to do with some of the striking success Filho ended up having before he actually landed that takedown. Barez is a fighter that I think is a little bit too old to have massive success in the UFC at this point in time, but we'll see if he can actually make good on his return after more than a year away from action. He's going up against Victor Altamirano, who had an unfortunate split decision loss to Felipe dos Santos back in February in a matchup where he utilized a takedown heavy approach, which is something we've been seeing from him over his last 3 fights, although his takedown defense is not that good, and we saw Tim Elliott take full advantage of that. But we saw Dos Santos land a little bit more damage, and that's probably what the judges ended up favoring, although there is a very good case that Altamirano deserved to win that matchup. He's very good with his relentlessness in terms of his takedowns and putting pressure on his opponent's mat returns and chaining takedown attempts together. And in terms of his striking game, he utilizes a lot of lateral movement and flashy kicks from distance to keep his opponents busy until he can change levels and get fights to the ground. Now, in this matchup against Barez, I think Barez is the better striker, but I think he could struggle with the takedown heavy approach that we'll likely see from Altamirano. Mix in Altamirano's motivation to probably be a little bit more aggressive and look to land more damage in this matchup that could allow Altamirano to be in the driver's seat of this fight. It's a very close fight, hence why the odds are as close as they are. But I do lean Altamirano here, not with a whole lot of confidence, as I've never really been that big on him, but mixing the layoff and the age discrepancy here, or at least a 35-year-old for Barez. I know Altamirano is still only 33, but I just don't think that this scenario bodes well for Barez. I'm going to go Altamirano. Again, minus 125, not a horrible line, but I just can't build up enough confidence to actually get to the betting window there. So I'm going to go Altamirano and Altamirano by decision, just as a prediction. All right, next up, women's bantamweight matchup as we have Daria Zheleznyakova coming in at plus 200, going up against Eileen Perez, who comes in at minus 235. Starting off on the Zheleznyakova side, she's on a 2-fight winning streak, which included a victory in her UFC debut against Montserrat Rendon. It was a somewhat close fight as the damage seemed to be showing more on Daria's face, but two judges still did score the damage that she was landing in terms of the more significant strikes that she landed on Rendon, while Rendon was looking to get more controlling positions and engaging in the clinch and landing some takedowns. To me, Daria doesn't really look like that special of an athlete or that special of a fighter. Training out of Paris with Russian roots, she seems to be more of a striker than a grappler. Her takedown defense is very questionable. She can have decent offensive takedowns, but I don't think she has the greatest control either. 9-1, really good record, but you have to question the level of competition she was doing it against. The lone defeat came against Melissa Mullins, who's also in the UFC now as well. I think a lot of it has to do with her takedown defense, which I think is going to be an issue for her, especially in this matchup where she's going up against a takedown heavy fighter in Eileen Perez. Now, it seems like the UFC is doing a slow build with Perez, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that she has a bit of a boring style. She can twerk all she wants after the fact, but during the fight, she's more so often looking to just drown opponents on the ground and grind them out with that top control. She had some issues in terms of controlling Jocelyn Edwards last time around, but luckily she did enough work from those top positions when she got them that she was still able to get the judge's decision to go her way. She's very strong and very difficult to deal with when she has that top position, especially dealing with fighters that don't have as good of a get-up game or reversal game off their back as we saw from Edwards, and that usually allows her to go out there and grind opponents out like we saw against Lucy Podilova and Ashley Evans Smith. We saw against Stephanie Egger that she will struggle with fighters that have a very crafty and fluid submission and jiu-jitsu game, but I don't think she'll have to worry about that too much here against Zheleznyakova, who is not so threatening off of her back. Zheleznyakova will likely have the striking advantage in this matchup, but I don't think that will matter much, as Perez will do a good enough job in terms of getting this fight to the ground, either with her judo throws or her straight-up takedowns, and I think from that top position, she'll be too strong and too heavy for Zheleznyakova to have much success off of her back. Look for a classic Perez-type decision victory here, and at minus 235, I think that's more than representative of how this fight will end up being kind of lopsided. So I'm going to go Perez and Perez by decision. All right, next up, we got Taylor Lapilus coming in at minus 360 in this bantamweight matchup, going up against the returning Vince Morales, who comes in at plus 295. We'll start off on Taylor Lapilus, who also was returning to the UFC just 3 fights ago, where he picked up a decision victory over the previously undefeated Colin Lorraine. He did end up losing his next matchup against Farid Basharat, getting out grappled and taken down in that matchup, showcasing some of the holes that still remain in his game at 32 years old and 24 fights into his career. But he did showcase some improved takedown defense against Cody Stamann, who went 1 of 6 on takedowns, but ultimately got battered from distance by Taylor Lapilus's rangy striking game. Lapilus has a 73-inch reach at bantamweight, which is very abnormal, and he does a great job in terms of pumping out that lead jab with his right hand from the southpaw position to keep opponents at bay, and then when he sees the opening, he follows up with that left cross down the pipe to land even more damage. He doesn't often chase the knockout or look to get opponents out of there. He just stays calm, cool, and collected from range and just chips away at his opponent from distance. It's really been his lack of takedown defense in certain fights that have caused him issues, but we are seeing there are fighters that he can stop those takedowns from, and fighters that if he does get taken down, he can immediately work back to his feet and then get back to the striking advantages that he normally holds in most matchups. His opponent this weekend, Vince Morales, returns to the UFC, originally going 3-5 between 2018 and 2022. He got cut by the promotion at the ending of 2022 and then went on a 5-fight winning streak, including 3 finishes, and 2 of them being over former UFC fighters. It seems like he's really taken to the jiu-jitsu game, specifically that front headlock series and that choke series, where he's been able to pull off 2 dart strokes and 1 Peruvian necktie, which he was able to get in his last matchup over Hunter Azure. In his first 18 fights, I believe it was, before this 5-fight winning streak that he was on, he only had 2 submission wins. He highly relied on his striking approach with combinations and a tepid pace kickboxing style. But in recent fights, he seems to be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more assertive, and loves to chase that front choke game. Even in the fights that he didn't end up winning by submission, you see him constantly looking to set up chokes. He does a great job in terms of transitioning from one position to getting that front headlock series. Some opponents have been privy to it, others not so much. And that's something that I look forward to seeing how he can implement at the UFC level. He's 33 years old. This is not a revolution for Morales where he's just going to come in here and become a title challenger by any means. But you have to wonder what kind of confidence he has coming into this matchup, coming back into the UFC on a 5-fight winning streak and showcasing the tools that he has on the regional scene. Lapilus obviously struggles in the grappling game at certain points, but I'd be surprised if Morales is able to get those spots often enough to at least take advantage of that flaw in Lapilus' game. I think we'll see Lapilus do a good enough job in terms of utilizing his 3-inch reach advantage and keeping Morales at bay, utilizing that speed, that stinging power, and that footwork to keep Morales on the end of his punches. Morales might have some success in terms of landing some takedowns and maybe getting some submission attempts, but I don't think it will come to fruition for him here to actually pull off the victory. Minus 360 is just a little bit too wide for me to be overly comfortable on the Lapilus side because we don't know what this confidence will do for Morales, but not so much to actually make me want to wager on the Morales side at plus 295. So I'm going to go Lapilus. I'm going to go Lapilus by decision, but I'll stay off this fight as a whole. All right, next up. Lightweight matchup here as we have Ludovit Klein coming in at minus 1100 going up against short notice replacement Roosevelt Roberts. Now, Ludovit Klein was originally scheduled to fight Nicholas Mota, which would have been a much more intriguing fight, but obviously Mota pulling out, in steps Roosevelt Roberts. Now, we'll start off on the Ludovit Klein side, who started 1-2 in his first 3 UFC fights, but has managed to go 5-0-1 over his last 6 fights, and he's looking very damn good doing so. This is a guy that I've kind of put in a box before in terms of just saying that he's a tepid pace kickboxer, but seeing how effective he can be by landing 50 to 55 significant strikes, get some control time, land some big shots, hurt his opponents, drop his opponents, but still go on to win decisions. He is starting to win me over. He's done a great job in terms of being disciplined and technical and waiting for his openings that he can explode into and then land those big shots. His last fight against Thiago Moises was probably the best performance we've ever seen from Klein, as he hurt Moises in the first and third round, but stayed composed enough that he was still able to win that fight by decision if he was not able to get Moises out of there. Powerful striker, nasty head kick, good jab, good patient striking, stinging power as well, and then good control when he's able to get that clinch or at least get opponents to the ground. Very impressed with what I've been seeing from Klein's development over the last year to year and a half. His opponent, Roosevelt Roberts, is a guy that a lot of people had championship or at least contender potential when he was originally in the UFC, but he did eventually get cut from the promotion after a little bit of a rough run. He went on a 3-fight losing streak, went back to the regional scene, picked up 2 wins, got invited back to the Ultimate Fighter, won his first fight with an 8-second knockout, ended up getting grinded out in his second fight by Austin Hubbard and losing a split decision, but a short notice opportunity against Matthias Rumbeski last year allowed him to get back into the UFC, and it was just not a fight that he was prepared to take, and he eventually got submitted in about 2 or 3 minutes of that fight. This one, again, I don't understand the long layoff for Roberts and then taking this fight on short notice against a very tough opponent in Ludovit Klein. Now, if Roberts is able to keep this fight in the striking realm, I think the fight looks closer than the odds actually indicate. I think he's a slicker, more voluminous striker than Klein, but Klein provides a little bit more threat in terms of the power that and emphasis in which he's able to land with. Roberts is more of a stinging combination striker who tries to set up knockouts with a barrage of shots rather than just a one-punch shot. He also has a sneaky submission game that he can implement against guys that look for desperation takedowns, but I think Klein has improved that part of his game enough that it won't be too much of an issue here. I'm looking for Klein to either grind out Roberts with a grapple-heavy approach or just land big shots on him, maybe find a knockout or maybe win a similar decision to what he did against Thiago Moises last time around. So, very unfortunate where Roberts is at in his career after having such high potential earlier on in his career, but he's just making bad decisions, taking bad fights, and I think this is another one of those spots. Again, minus 1100, prohibitive favorite. You can't parlay that spot considering the lack of return that it provides. But I do think Klein wins this, and I think he gets it done on the scorecards. All right, next up. Light heavyweights going at it here as we have Umar C coming in at minus 505, going up against Da Woon Jung coming in at plus 380. Now, we'll start off on the Umar C side, who has a spotless 10-0 record and had a successful UFC debut against Tuco Tokos last time around, where he was able to get the back of the BJJ black belt and find a rear naked choke. C is a very aggressive grappler that does a great job in terms of managing his gas tank and going 15 minutes if he needs to, but he's also very dominant from that top position, landing ground and pound and opening up submission opportunities that he normally clamps onto. The guy is athletic as hell, 6'4", 83-inch reach, 28 years old, looks to be in spectacular shape and looks to have a ton of potential. Hence why we see such a big price tag on him here, especially against somebody who's had as many fights as Da Woo Jung has had in the UFC. I think this kid has tremendous potential. I think he's very good. I think he does a great job in terms of waiting for his opportunities to get the takedown and exposing that, getting the double leg. Very powerful in terms of just picking up his opponents and slamming them if he needs to do it that way. And he's very methodical in how he approaches his wrestling game. His opponent, Da Woon Jung, started his or at least UFC career going 4-0-1, but now finds himself on a 3-fight losing streak, being finished in 2 of those 3 matchups. Last time around, he got picked apart by Carlos Ulberg and eventually submitted in the dying seconds of their matchup, which had a lot of activity, which led to Jung slowing down and eventually giving up that submission. Jung has been out of the cage for over a year now and hasn't really looked to be too active. He's trained a little bit down at Killcliff FC to start off his camp, but then finished it off in Korea with Team Seda, I believe that the name of his team is. Big power puncher, good elbows in the clinch, can grind on opponents if he needs to, but if he's unable to dictate the pace and really get his game going, he starts to fall behind on his opponents, and that's where guys are able to dictate the pace on him and really just have their own success. I'm expecting C to do that here. I'm expecting C to wear on Jung. I think that's going to slow Jung down pretty quickly here, and I think that will open up submission opportunities for the Frenchman. So I'm going to go C. I think he wins this fight without too much issue. Jung by knockout plus 700 is probably the best way to go about it if you like the Jung side, but I still think that C will do a good enough job in terms of controlling the pace here, getting his wrestling going, breaking down Jung, and then eventually opening up a finishing opportunity. So give me C and C by submission. All right, fun light heavyweight matchup here at Pick'em Odds, where we have Iwan Cutelaba looking to buck the 1-4 trend of his last 5 fights, going up against UFC newcomer Ivan Erslan. We'll start off on the Cutelaba side of things, who's been a very rough time in the UFC. He's 6-9-1 over his 16-fight UFC career, and he's 1-4 in his last 5 fights, as I previously mentioned. He mainly came in as a headhunter in the UFC, looking to knock opponents out. Then we saw him try to implement a bit of a wrestle-heavy game in some of his fights, and then we've also seen him get caught in submissions, knocked out by certain opponents, and really struggle to get his game going, especially when he reverts to just headhunting and getting picked apart by slicker and more disciplined opponents. I think we've seen his ceiling, right? I think we know that he should be able to stick around in the UFC if he can get certain matchups where he can just go out there and finish these opponents quickly. Otherwise, he's likely going to get outworked by slicker opponents and either get finished or go to a decision and lose on the scorecards. His opponent, Ivan Erslan, is an interesting signing for the UFC, as he is a 32-year-old fighter who primarily competed for KSW over the last couple of years and is 3-2 over his last 5 fights. He's not on this crazy winning streak, but he is a very fun striker that I probably believe caught the UFC's eye. I think it also helps the fact that Erslan signed with Ali Abdelaziz, who has a stranglehold on a lot of the management and the guys that come into the UFC, in a very close relationship with Dana and the matchmakers. So I definitely think that helped Erslan's chances in terms of making it to the UFC. Very slick striker, good crisp punches down the pipe. He can be hit, which is how he's lost his last fight to Rafael Heretic, I believe the kid's name was. Got clipped in that matchup, had success of his own, but ultimately ended up getting knocked out in that fight. And he has fought for the KSW title twice, but come up short in both of those appearances. Sometimes his chin shows up and he goes out there and has a great performance. Sometimes it doesn't and he ends up getting knocked out. On this matchup, it's clearly a coin flip, right? Both guys, minus 110, completely makes sense. Either guy lands a big enough shot, the other one is probably going to go out. So you have to go to the technical basis of this fight. Who is the better technical striker? In my opinion, it's Ivan Erslan. We see him throw cleaner shots. We see him throw straighter shots down the pipe, which will likely land more effectively and with more power than the wide winging hooks and aggressive style that we've seen from Cutelaba throughout his career. So I'm going to lean Erslan here. But again, this fight is way too much or way too volatile to be confident in, to be like, hey, this is a lock. There is no lock in this fight, at least in my opinion. I'm going to go Erslan. I'm going to go Erslan by knockout. But this is more of a sit back and enjoy the chaos kind of fight than actually trying to invest some money in this and trying to come out on the winning end. So I'm going to go Erslan and Erslan by knockout. All right. Next up, lightweight division. We're going to go with Ziam coming in at -130, going up against Matt, the steamroller Frevola, coming in at +110. Now, I'll start off on the Ziam side, who picked up a split decision victory over Claudio Puelles last time around in a fight that people expected, or at least people didn't think would play out as closely as it did. I think it showed some of the holes in Ziam's game still, as being his takedown defense. Luckily for him, Puelles is not as good in terms of establishing that top position and raining down big shots from full mount or just guard. He's more so looking for submissions, looking to get that knee bar and trying to get the tap from his opponents. Luckily, Ziam showed good, calm, cool composure, and even when he did get taken down, he was eventually able to work back to his feet and get to his striking advantage, which we know Puelles very much struggles with. That's not 3 straight wins for Ziam, who's gotten a good win over Michał Fidlak, Jai Herbert, and then obviously that Claudio Puelles fight. Prior to that, he got submitted by Terrence McKinney, who was quickly able to get him to the ground, get his back, and sink in that rear naked choke. Ziam, at his best, is a guy that can dictate the pace in terms of his striking, managing his range, putting out good combinations, utilizing good leg kicks. But we've seen him kind of get exposed in terms of his takedown defense, which is a hole in his game that still hasn't been completely filled or corrected at this point. And I think he's going to struggle with that here against Matt Frevola, who we know is a very strong wrestler. And when he can get to his game and his durability shows up, he is a very tough cookie to crack. We saw Frevola on a 3-fight winning streak, finishing all 3 of those opponents in the first round, exchanging in the fire with these guys and getting the better of them, most notably against Drew Dober in a back-and-forth firefight. And then last time around, we saw him land a few takedowns against Benoit Saint-Denis, but the BJJ prowess of Saint-Denis got him out of those bad spots and eventually allowed him to put the pressure on Frevola and get him out of there by knockout. This striker versus grappler matchup, clearly the grappler obviously having some knockout power as well. But I think we're going to see Frevola look to get this fight to the ground immediately and start to establish that top position. I think Frevola is a little bit better than Puelles in terms of maintaining that top position. And from there, I think we see Frevola really dominate from that top position, get to those those dominant positions, maybe find a TKO or a submission finish as well. But I think his wrestling is going to be way too hard for Ziam to deal with. Ziam's lack of knockout power as well gives me even more confidence on the Frevola side that Frevola should do a good enough job in terms of closing the distance and getting this fight to the ground, where he should have no issue in terms of holding Ziam on his back. I really like Frevola in this spot. The method of victory, I'm not so sold on, right? He either grinds this fight out like he's done in the past against other strikers like Jalen Turner and actually Luis Pena was more of a grappler, but he was able to grind those guys out, or he can just go out there, and if he's able to get those dominant positions, he could be threatening with that arm triangle choke or that rear naked choke and getting the finish that way as well. I do like Frevola a fair bit here, and I think he dominates Ziam en route to a decision victory, but just taking his money line at +110 will be more than fruitful in my opinion. All right. Next up, we got Perez's favorite son, Morgan Charriere, coming in at -700 in this featherweight matchup, going up against the ever-entertaining Gabriel Miranda, who comes in at +500. Starting off on the Morgan Charriere side, he's coming off of a split decision loss to Chepe Mariscal in a very close fight. I thought the first round was Chepe's. I thought the second round was Charriere's. I thought the third round was very close until the last 30 seconds or so, where we saw Mariscal land the most damage of the fight by landing some big ground and pound and keeping Charriere in some bad spots. I will give Charriere the benefit of the doubt, though. He did perform much better than I expected him to. To me, he's been more so of a low-paced kickboxer who relies heavily on knockouts and finishes to get his wins. But his takedown defense, submission defense, grappling defense is much more improved than I originally expected it. His power, his speed is something that really needs to be respected, but I would like to see a little bit more aggressiveness out of him. And that could prove to be fruitful for him. I think his 19-10-1 record perfectly represents what kind of fighter this guy is. He's very popular amongst the French fans because of that contingent that he has behind him. But I don't think that this is a guy that's going to crack into the title contention, especially in a very talent-stacked featherweight division. If the UFC continues to match him up properly, continuously putting him on these September French cards, that will be the best for them. He'll bring out a big crowd, always have a good atmosphere when he's fighting, and I think they matched him up perfectly this weekend against Gabriel Miranda, who is a kill or be killed fighter. In his 23 professional fights, 19 of them have finished inside the distance. He's either going out there and quickly finishing these guys by submission, just as he did against Shane Young last time around, or he throws everything at the wall, and if he doesn't get the finish, he ends up gassing out and getting finished just as he did against Benoit Saint-Denis in his UFC debut. It's funny, all three of Miranda's fights have taken place in September 2022, 2023, and now 2024. So I'm not sure what has kept him out of action and only being able to compete in September, but he is 34 years old, which is something that you need to consider as well. Miranda, BJJ black belt, very aggressive, but like I said, if it doesn't work out for him quickly within the first 3 or 4 minutes, things start to go south, and that's where I think we'll see Charriere showcase his submission defense, do a good enough job in terms of staying out of those bad positions, and then taking advantage of Miranda slowing down and finding that finish within a round and a half. You can get under 1.5 at plus money right now. Obviously, there is a little bit of concern considering some of the timidity at times that we'll see from Charriere, but being buoyed by the French crowd here and seeing Miranda slowing down as he stops to or continues to stop his grappling advances, I think that will buoy Charriere here to at least seek a finish and try to get Miranda out of there. So I'm going to go Charriere inside the distance, the under 1.5. Probably my favorite spot, especially overpaying minus 700 on a guy like Charriere, who should win this fight. But we cannot overlook the grappling threat that Miranda provides early in fights. But we'll go Charriere under 1.5, likely getting the finish in the first round. All right, next up, welterweights going out of here. Very fun fight as we have plus 140 on Kevin Jousset going up against Brian Battle, who comes in at minus 165. We'll start off on the Kevin Jousset side of things, who's won his first 2 UFC matchups, the first of which by submission. Last time around, he went up against Kenan Song and just battered him from distance with leg kicks and jabs down the pipe. Training out of City Kickboxing, his background is actually in judo, but he's developed to such a calm and cool, collected striking game that a lot of people think that he probably started off in the striking realm. But it's really just his discipline and utilizing this distance management, his range finders, his range weapons that have allowed him to really dictate the pace in most matchups and batter opponents from distance. When he looks to get fights to the ground, not too bad with his judo, but I'm not so impressed with his inability to control opponents from that top position. That's what's caused him some issues in the past. But 10-2 record, 31 years old, seems to be in his prime right now. I think that we'll see a very good version of him this weekend. But he's going up against a very tough Brian Battle, who is now 3-1 in the welterweight division, coming into his 6th welterweight fight. His last one was a fight that was clearly going in his way. Probably would have got the finish and the win had it not been for an unintentional eye poke that caused a stoppage to the fight. So he could easily be 4-1 now at the 170-pound division. The only loss in that run was to Rinat Fakhretdinov, who had no issues taking Battle to the ground and controlling him for 13 minutes out of a 15-minute fight. Battle is a guy that utilizes a lot of pressure, a lot of good distance management. He's been a lot more proactive in terms of getting off the cage and getting out of bad positions, digging the underhooks, changing position, getting back out into the cage, and then just walking and pressuring his opponents with long-range weapons, good kicks up the middle, and he also has a slick submission game that he can lean on if he needs to. I think Battle is more complete than Jousset here. I think Battle will take command of this fight. I think he'll be able to start walking down Jousset and dictating the pace of this fight, and I think that's going to cause Jousset to get a little bit overwhelmed here. I think that will open up finishing opportunities for Battle that he'll be able to take full advantage of, and I think that we'll see Battle finally get into his groove and start achieving the potential that a lot of people expected from him after the tremendous run that he had on The Ultimate Fighter, which he ended up winning. So I'm going to go Battle here. Slow, tepid paced approach just to break down Jousset, and then he starts picking up the pace in the second and third rounds, which eventually will open up a finishing opportunity for him. So I'm going to take Battle and Battle inside the distance. All right, next up, featherweight matchup here between the streaking William Gomis, who's on an 11-fight winning streak, 3 of those coming inside the UFC. He comes in as the big underdog at plus 240, going up against Joanderson Brito, who's also streaking, coming in at minus 280. Now, we'll start off on the Gomis side, who utilized a grapple-heavy approach throughout the regional run in his career, but since joining the UFC, we've seen him take a little bit more of a mobile striking approach, staying at distance, kicking his opponents with his long-range 73-inch reach again, utilizing his long-range weapons to keep opponents at bay, but also utilizing a lot of movement so opponents find it hard to land shots of their own. I was very heavy on Francis Marshall 2 fights ago against William Gomis, and we saw once Marshall finally bit down on the mouthpiece, crossed the pocket, and got his takedowns going, things worked out very well for him, and he was able to win that 3rd round. Unfortunately, it was too little too late by that point, and 2 judges had awarded the first 2 rounds to Gomis to end up getting that win. Gomis's last win was a very weird, controversial one that he won by... it seemed to be a shot below the belt. The referee didn't deem it so, and he ended up calling the fight, saying it was a TKO win. I still have my question marks about Gomis, right? He is not only an 11-fight winning streak, but I question the level of competition he faced before the UFC, or at least the stylistic matchups that he had those nights. He's going up against a very confident and streaking Joanderson Brito here, who's, I believe, on a 5-fight winning streak. Only lost his UFC debut to Andre Fili, who used not Andre Fili, Bill Algeo. He defeated Andre Fili by knocking him out, but he's finished all 5 of the opponents in his last 5 fights. He's very aggressive, very good, improving his cardio, improving his ability to manage his gas tank, which is something people have tried to, kind of shit on him for in the past. But I thought we saw a great performance from him against Jonathan Pierce, who was trying to take a grapple-heavy approach, failed to keep Brito in those bad spots, and Brito was eventually able to make him pay for it with a submission victory, getting the tap in the 2nd round there. He's very aggressive, loves to crash the pocket, loves to keep his opponents uncomfortable and just battering them. It's funny that he has a 2021 win over Diego Lopez, who's positioning himself close to a title shot, whereas Brito, with only 1 loss in the UFC, doesn't seem to be as close to the top of the division, considering how the UFC seems to be matching him up. But hopefully a win here, even another finish, could get him on the mic and call out a guy in Diego Lopez, who he absolutely battered just 3 years ago, and maybe that could get him a higher profile fight in his next matchup. I think that this is a very easy fight for Brito. I think Gomis will struggle to keep the distance here, and Brito is going to stay in his face, and I think that will likely lead to Brito landing a big shot that puts Gomis out. Maybe round 2 Brito, maybe round 3 Brito, but as Gomis starts to slow down, he's going to be ripe for the picking for the aggressive style of Brito, and I think we'll see Brito find that finish, like I said, probably round 2 or round 3. I don't think you'll have too much issue dealing with Gomis' style at all. All right, high-level middleweight fight here, or at least high-stakes middleweight fight between striker Nasruddin Imavov, who comes in at minus 210, going up against Brendan Allen, who comes in at plus 180. We'll start off on the Nasruddin Imavov side, who's coming off of a TKO victory of Jared Cannonier a few months ago in Louisville, if I'm not mistaken. And that was a matchup where he was actually down on 2 judges' scorecards going into the 4th round, but it seemed like momentum was on his side, as he did a great job in terms of picking apart the veteran and eventually finding the finish the way that he did. His last loss actually came at the hands of Sean Strickland, who went on to win the title later that year, but he's bounced back with what should be 3 straight victories. He did have an unfortunate no contest against Chris Curtis in a fight that he was controlling relatively easily. Imavov has come a long way since his very close fight against Jordan Williams and his loss to Phil Hawes back in 2021, and I think he is starting to achieve his potential and get close to what a lot of people thought he could be, but I did not have much confidence in him, but he's doing a great job in terms of improving his takedown defense and just really establishing his range and his style from distance with his kickboxing style. Very good kicks up the middle, very good combinations, nasty elbows, and he does a good job in terms of dictating the pace when he finally gets into his groove. His opponent this weekend, Brendan Allen, is on a pretty long winning streak of his own. He's 7-0 over his last 7 fights, and even avenged a loss to a guy that handed him his last defeat in Chris Curtis last time around. I believe it was a split decision win for Brendan Allen, but I thought he clearly won that matchup. But he showed that he can, face his demons in terms of facing a guy with big knockout power and still walk through that and get to his game. Allen is most dangerous when he is able to get his opponents to the ground and utilize his jiu-jitsu. Very good with taking the back of his opponents and finding that rear naked choke. I believe the 4 wins in that 5 in his last 5 fights have come by rear naked choke as well, which just goes to show how dangerous he can be. And he has 30 fights under his belt at 28 years old and a lot of high-level experience even for the regional scene. Very impressive work that we've been seeing from Brendan Allen throughout his career. He's really coming into his own. His striking is getting better, but I wonder what it looks like against a guy that's clearly a better striker than him. He, proved me wrong against Chris Curtis, who I thought was a better striker than him, but I think Imavov is an even better striker here. Odds a little bit too wide here at minus 210 for Imavov, in my opinion. I think Imavov should be able to dictate the pace here, land the better strikes, and really keep Allen at bay. His submission defense is really going to have to be on point here because I could definitely see a scenario in which Allen is able to get this fight to the ground and eventually get the back of Imavov, which will likely end up keeping me away from this fight. The under is something that I'm going to be considering it's at plus money. Obviously, Imavov a much better striker than Allen, and that could open up finishing opportunities for him. Whereas Allen, very dangerous on the ground, and that could open up submission or TKO opportunities for him. I'm going to go Imavov. I think we've seen him keep this fight up long enough to eventually establish that striking range and demoralize Allen and then eventually find that finish. But again, minus 210, a little bit too wide for me. I'd be more interested in Imavov if he was down to about minus 160, but I doubt we're going to get that type of line movement over the next couple of days. So I'll pass on this fight, but I'll consider the under 2.5 as a possible bet here. All right, that brings us to our main event. Very fun fight here between Renato Moicano coming in at plus 230, going up against Benoit Saint-Denis, who comes in at minus 270. Now, Moicano is on a 3-fight winning streak after that unfortunate loss that he suffered at the hands of Rafael Dos Anjos. That was a fight, if you guys remember, that he took on short notice, 5-round co-main event. I believe it was for the Covington and Masvidal card. And then we saw Moicano take off a boatload of time after that submission victory over Brad Riddell. He's managed to return with a win over Drew Dober, which he just inched out, taking advantage of poor fight IQ from Drew Dober and getting good control in that second and third round. I think it was second and third. And then the Jalen Turner fight, where he was nearly finished, but Turner, bad fight IQ, not closing the show, allowing Moicano to fight back into that matchup and eventually get a TKO finish in the second round of that fight, taking place at UFC 300 in April. Moicano, nasty Muay Thai, but is best when he's able to get opponents to the ground and utilizes smothering BJJ style to open up submissions or TKO opportunities for himself. But he is ripe for the picking against better strikers, as we saw with Jalen Turner and Drew Dober. But he's been able to utilize his fight IQ and his experience to get the positions that he needs to end up winning matchups. He's 35 years old. He's taken a lot of damage over his last couple of fights, and that's something to keep an eye on. He has obviously gotten a huge following since his post-fight interviews have gone viral a bunch of times, and I'm happy that he's finding out-of-cage success, but I just don't think he's going to be able to parlay that into much success in terms of getting into the contention, or at least title contention. And he's going up against a tough guy here in Benoit Saint-Denis, who was very close to getting a title shot of his own, but ended up coming up short against Dustin Poirier earlier this year after getting TKO'd in the second round of that matchup. Now, the big storyline going into that fight was it seemed that Benoit Saint-Denis had staph infection. There was this weird mark on his forehead, and apparently came out that he had staph after that matchup, and he was taking a lot of medication, which he attributes to his cardio dump after that first round, where he was working very hard to get those positions against Poirier, which he got successfully, but was unable to close the show. Now, people were kind of just pointing to either Benoit just not being that good, but I think Poirier proved a lot of people wrong, especially in his fight against Islam Makhachev in June, where he showcased superior or much better submission defense and grappling defense, which allowed him to make it a much tougher fight for Makhachev, but we still saw Poirier end up losing that fight. But we can give some credit to Benoit Saint-Denis that, hey, maybe Poirier has just made good enough improvements in his submission game that, it's not Benoit just not being that good. Now, in this matchup, both guys often look to utilize grapple-heavy approaches, but I think the aggressiveness and forward movement of Benoit Saint-Denis will allow him to have the edge in this matchup. I think he's going to be able to keep Renato Moicano on his back foot, and then I think he can look to take this fight to the ground and grind it out. We saw Dos Anjos use a grapple-heavy approach and keep Moicano on his back. And I think Benoit can do the same thing here. Originally, I was thinking that I would lean on the under 2.5, considering how violent and aggressive both of these guys are. But I also wouldn't be surprised to see Benoit look to take this to the ground and not try to get overzealous, but rather look to just grind Moicano out and take this into deep waters where he could potentially find a finish at that point. Again, this is scheduled for 5 rounds, and if they're not able to get the early finish, this could end up looking a little bit sloppy in deeper water. But I do think that the aggressiveness from Saint-Denis more often than not will pay off for him here, just not at minus 270 odds. I do like Benoit Saint-Denis here, and it seems like the line is moving us a little bit, at least towards Moicano. So if we can get Saint-Denis closer to minus 200 or minus 220 by fight time, I'd be a little bit more comfortable taking a shot on him there. Regardless, I'm going to go Saint-Denis. I'm going to take a flyer maybe on his decision prop here, as I think we end up seeing him just grind this fight out similar to what Dos Anjos was able to do against Moicano, and he secures a 5-round decision victory over Renato Moicano. So give me Benoit Saint-Denis and Saint-Denis by decision. Good Lord. Almost 50 minutes here breaking down this card for you guys. It's been a long time since I've broken down a UFC card, or at least 2 weeks it's been. So it's nice to get back in the booth here, get back into the groove. I believe there's 9 straight events or 9 straight weekends of UFC events. So we're back in the circus of things here. Again, PFL Europe going down this weekend as well. I'll have written breakdowns for that on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Otherwise, I'll see you guys again tomorrow for the top 3 Lock of the Night candidates, top 3 Dog of the Night candidates, quick picks we got coming up as well, the free parlay for you guys, the Lucky 2-Step Lucky Trinity, and the 3 best prop bets. A ton of content for UFC Paris coming your way this week. See you guys again tomorrow. Peace.
Last thing.